As you can see, the title of this slideshow is The Life-Saving Kindness and Courage of Strangers, the story of Greta and Rudy, 1937 to 1946. Greta is my mom, Rudy, my dad. Before I actually show the slides, just a few introductory comments. I hope and I do believe that you'll find this presentation to be not only informative, but also interesting, in no small part because when I first put this together, I showed it to my two daughters. They were young adults at the time. They're still pretty young adults. They both had really good suggestions, which I incorporated into this. My older daughter, she's a teacher, and one of her comments was, "Dad, I really like this, but you've got to tell folks right up front, why are you doing this? What are your objectives?" I have three objectives. One is to show what happened in the German Nazi-controlled territories so that it never happens again to any individuals or groups of people. A second objective, a key objective, is to hopefully inspire those who see this presentation to act vigorously when they see wrongs and to reach out and help those who need a little assistance. A third objective is to help honor those who suffered through the Holocaust and its consequences. Although what you're about to see happened some 85 years ago to my own mom and dad, I believe, and I think you'll agree, that in light of our current, somewhat crazy world of strident politics, social and racial divisions, a European war, a Mideast war, the lessons and messages that we can learn from the Holocaust not only stand the test of time, but can serve us all of us, really well as we try to make our own world a little bit better and our environment a little better. Don't worry about dates. Don't worry about family relationships. Just sit back, watch, listen, and hopefully learn. And finally, in the interest of, shall we say, full disclosure, I should tell you that I should not be doing this. I should not be here today. Not at all. In fact, I'm not supposed to exist at all. Neither should either of my two daughters. This picture happened to be taken some years ago when they were both pregnant, nor should any of my four, now five grandchildren. The woman you see in the lower left-hand corner, that's Greta, my mom. The only reason I'm here, and that my daughters and my children were ever born, is because of the courage and endurance of my parents, and because people, including total strangers, reached out to help save the lives of my mom and especially my dad. My family story proves that acts of kindness to others, generosity to others, having the courage to stand up for what's right and what's fair and actively opposing what's wrong can and does convert fear to hope and devastation to happiness. On the somewhat busy screen, you'll see a yellow asterisk right in the middle. You'll see that asterisk on subsequent slides. That's when people, including total strangers, saved the lives of my parents. You'll also see on the bottom a photograph of Pastor Martin Niemöller. Some of you may know his name, some of you may know his words. He was a Lutheran pastor, and about 7 years after the end of World War II, he wrote the following very memorable words. Some of them, or all of this whole passage, some of you may know. What he wrote about 7 years after World War II, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I show this to you for two reasons. First, because I personally think these are such powerful and meaningful words. Second, because it's a good introduction to this. This is an unassuming black binder. Inside is a 96-page, detailed, typewritten memoir written by my dad's brother, who I'll refer to as Uncle Vic. Uncle Vic, my dad, and his third brother, Uncle Gus, they all went through the events that are described in here and that form a fundamental basis for this presentation. Uncle Vic wrote this in Shanghai in January and February of 1939, literally weeks, at most months, after the events in question. Historians, lawyers think a document like this is particularly significant. It's a contemporaneous document. It was written within weeks, days, at most months of what is described here. And so it's not marred by the author not remembering something innocently or distorting things innocently. He wrote this very shortly after the events in question, and you'll see what he describes. This is on file with the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And Uncle Vic wrote in Shanghai in 1939 the following: "It is not true that every Austrian turned into a Jew-hater or animal, but I cannot help blaming my decent countrymen. Nobody who had always opposed Hitler. Nobody spoke up when it would have been so important. And now it was too late, and they too now face the threat of the concentration camp." Brief background: this is my mom on her 99th birthday. This is my mom during the years in question. This is my dad. This picture was taken in 1934. This is my dad a few years before he passed away. My dad's name, as you know, was Rudy, or formerly Rudolph. My mom's name was Greta. In Austria, that's Gretel. Believe it or not, she had one sibling, a brother, an older brother. Believe it or not, you can tell her, you can guess already. Her older brother was named Hansel. Here you can see Hansel and Gretel growing up, literally Hansel, as youngsters growing up during the good years in Austria. This is the last family photograph of the Gans family in Austria. My dad is on the left. One of his two brothers, Uncle Gus, is on the right. His two sisters, Erna and Liesel, on the side. Sitting down below are his parents. In the middle, sitting down, is Uncle Vic, the gentleman who wrote the memoir. Sitting next to Uncle Vic is Vali, his wife. As you'll see, Vali turns out to be something of a heroine in this true story. This all happened in Austria. Austria, beautiful country. The Alps, rolling green hills and pastures. The Danube, beautiful Danube running right through it. And for many years, for decades, for hundreds of years, the Jewish population was deeply integrated, well integrated, into all aspects of the Austrian society, whether it was the business community, the social community. For many years, my dad's grandfather was a physician, his great-grandfather was a physician, his great-grandfather was physician to the royal court of Austria. And there were Jewish doctors, lawyers, artists, scientists, merchants, great musicians and composers, as well as Jewish Austrian military generals and senior officers. But unfortunately, there was also an undercurrent of anti-Semitism. And, as you know, Austria was right next door to Germany. Here's another map. Here you see Austria and Germany. Right above the T in Austria, perhaps you can make out, there's the word Linz, L-I-N-Z. That's where my parents grew up. You can also see on this diagram a D that I hand wrote. That's Dachau. The distance between Linz and Dachau is like from San Diego to Santa Barbara. You'll see why I said that in a few minutes. This is my mom's house. Literally a photograph from there at that time. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, perhaps, the letters T-A-U-S-S-I-G, Taussig. That's my mother's maiden name. There, my grandfather, my mother's father, operated a restaurant, and my mom and her brother and her father and mother, they lived upstairs at that very building, which I personally know still exists today. It doesn't say Taussig anymore, but it's there. Linz also had a beautiful synagogue. This is not an actual photograph of that synagogue for reasons that you'll find out in a moment. This is an architectural student's virtual reproduction of it. He found the actual plans of the Linz synagogue, and he created this virtual image. You can see it was on beautiful grounds. This is the inside of it. I want to draw your attention to the door here. This is the front door. This I found in an actual history book. It's the front door of that actual synagogue. See how big that door is in relation to the people. And now go back. You can get a sense of how big this synagogue was. Beautiful, large synagogue. This is a series of photographs of my dad's brother, Uncle Gus, emerging with his brand new bride from that very synagogue on September 23, 1938. Linz was also the hometown of this fellow. He wasn't born there, but he always considered Linz to be his hometown. As a young man, he went to Germany. He wasn't particularly successful. He wasn't particularly brilliant, but he was a spellbinding speaker, ruthless, and a virulent anti-Semite. We don't have enough time to go into the detailed history, but just to put it in context, in January 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. A lot of serious anti-Jewish discriminatory laws come into place. In August of 1934, he becomes absolute dictator of Germany. And in March of 1938, he marches into and takes control of Austria. My mom's story, and then I'll go to my dad's story, and then a little bit after that, my mom's story. This is my mom's father, Victor Taussig, not to be confused with Uncle Vic. Victor Taussig was a handsome man. He was a soldier for Austria in World War I. He was deeply ingrained in the Linz business community, in the social community, in the Linz temple. He was on the choir. I can hear his deep baritone voice to this day. And he was, in today's world, a master brewer. He knew how to distill alcoholic beverages, and he served alcoholic beverages in the restaurant down below, which they had operated very successfully for many years. This is my mom's mom, my grandma, Ella Taussig, and she raised Hansel and Gretel in Linz, Austria, with her husband. My mom was educated in high school. She graduated high school, but then was sent to Vienna to become a certified seamstress. That was a big deal in those days because you couldn't go to a department store and find racks and racks of clothes. You had to preserve your clothes. Being a certified seamstress, it took her a year to get that certification, was a big deal, especially during the war years, and you'll see how that became handy. She also, in high school, learned some French and a little English, which also was helpful. She was active in the local Jewish group called Blau-Weiß, and there she and Rudy met and fell in love as teenagers. Well, my mom was a teenager. My dad was a little older. Now, in Linz in 1930s, the people in Linz, especially the Jews, were concerned about the rise of Nazis in Germany. They had heard bad stories about what was happening to Jews in Germany, including the closure of Jewish businesses, taking of Jewish properties, beatings, tortures, and even some rumors of something called concentration camps. But in my mom's words, and she did an audio biography, in my mom's words, they all felt that was exaggerations, quote unquote, that could never happen here in Austria. That's what she felt, that's what they all felt, because they were part of the society. In March of 1938, my mom took a ski trip up to the Austrian Alps with her friends. She was a young teenager. She and her friends went up into the Austrian Alps in March of 1938. As you might imagine, in those days, there's very little, if any, communication with the outside world. No cell phones. I don't know if they ever had any landlines. When they were up there, my mom did not know, while she and her friends were skiing up there. On March 12, 1938, Hitler and the Germans and the Nazis marched into and took control of Austria. When my mom came back to Linz, this is what she observed. This is not a family photograph. This I got out of a history book, but you can see in the lower left-hand side, it says the word Linz. This is what she saw. They were in total shock. They knew things were getting bad, but that this could actually happen, as my mom said, it never occurred to us. My grandfather, Victor Taussig, immediately arrested. Why? Because he was Jew. He was a Jew. Thrown into jail for no other reason, as were many other officials of Jewish organizations, and into my mother's home, with her mother and her brother, with her father now in jail, were placed two of the worst, the SS, the most brutal of all the Nazis. And there, in the beginning form of terrorism, they watched day and night every movement any of the three of them did, whether it was to the bedroom or the bathroom or the kitchen, constantly watching them all the time, and the Taussigs were barred from ever entering into, much less operating, their restaurant down below. They couldn't make a living. On March 13, 1938, the day after Hitler took control of Austria, he wanted to give a celebratory speech. And he wanted to give it in what he considered to be his hometown, Linz, Austria. What I'm about to tell you, this mini story within the story, is, from my perspective, one of the most important things to come out of this, at least from my perspective. My uncle, my mother's brother, Hansel, he wrote an autobiography. And he writes what happened that day. Remember, his father was already in jail. 2 SS in his apartment, in his building where they resided. He had seen Jews being rousted, being beaten on the streets, possessions taken, apartments overtaken. Here's what he wrote. Oh, there's Hitler. Hitler on the balcony above Linz. That's an actual photograph of Hitler on that balcony over the main plaza in Linz. And here is what Hans wrote. My father was on medication for his heart condition. I took a package of medication and was bringing it to him to the jail. On the way, I had one of the strangest experiences in my life. Hitler was speaking from a balcony to a huge mass of people. As I passed, a strange feeling of elation overcame me, although I was fully aware who was speaking up there. My only explanation is that he radiated some kind of mass hypnosis. This would also explain the hysterical reaction to all of the nonsense that he uttered. Think about this. Hans had 2 SS in his room. His father was in jail. He saw these terrible things. He heard the rumors. He knew what was coming to Linz, what was coming to Austria. And yet he was transfixed by Hitler's speech. In Hans's own words, he felt elated. How could this be? The dangers of a demagogue. I'll tell you what I take from this. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Whether I'm listening to a politician or a professor or a poet or a preacher, whether that person happens to be a Democrat or a Republican, liberal or conservative, I don't care. If that person is appealing to passion or prejudice, then I step back, I take a healthy skepticism, and I think, wait a minute, does that message, does that speech, does that person, does that resonate with my heart and my soul? And if not, well, maybe that's not the message, maybe that's not the person I should be following. My mom's parents quickly realized there was no future for Jewish youth anymore in Austria. Wonderful people, Jews in Linz, working with extraordinary people in England, as many of you know, managed to get out a lot of Jewish youth, or some Jewish youth, and my mom was one of the lucky ones. She had to get out under certain conditions. This is the condition that was on her passport from England. England was one of the very few people that would allow people to get out and into their country, but even there were restrictions. Leave to land, permission to land, on conditions that the holder register at once with the police and does not enter into any employment other than as a resident in service in a private household. She could get in, but she had to be a maid. Notwithstanding any other skills she had to be a maid. As for Hans, he wanted to go and did go to Palestine. Hans left Linz forever on July 31, 1938. My mom, Greta, was due to leave for Linz and did leave for Linz the very next day, August 1, 1938. She was still just a teenager, about 18 years old. Shortly before she was to board that train in Linz, she wanted to try to say goodbye to her father. Her father was in jail. Her mom and my mom, they walked to the jail to try to see him. He wasn't there. They had taken him to a Nazi government tax office on trumped-up charges that he had failed to pay taxes. Remarkably, after they walked to the tax office, they were able to see him surrounded by Nazis there, anticipating that this may very well be the last time that they'd see each other. My grandfather put his arms on her shoulders and blessed her. They said goodbye, kissed each other, and my mom tearfully left to go to the train station to basically have to do the same then with her mom. She got on the train, sadly waved goodbye to her mom. Again, remember, she was a teenager going off to some completely unknown land where she barely spoke the language. In her words, it was so bewildering. I shall never forget how hard it was to say goodbye to my parents and to Rudy, not knowing if I would ever see them again. My grandmother went home to her place of residence. Just months earlier, she had 2 rambunctious teenagers in that residence and her husband. Now she was all alone, surrounded by Nazis, facing a very uncertain and frightening future. I'm going to turn to my dad's story, and then we'll come back for the conclusion. My dad's story. This is my dad in Linz as a young man. This is my dad with his two brothers, Uncle Vic on your right, Uncle Gus on your left. My dad was a really good soccer player. He was a good student, well-educated, and trained as an accountant, fully employed for many years in an insurance company in Linz, never once ran afoul of the law. Very shortly after the Nazis took control of Austria and Linz, my dad was arrested. Why? Because he was Jew. As Uncle Vic wrote in his memoir, but why was Rudy arrested, we asked, who did not have a single enemy? It was like a bomb had been dropped, and we were all on the verge of mental collapse. There was never a time when we could feel safe from the claws of the Gestapo, the secret police. The first time my dad was arrested, he was in jail for 6 weeks. The conditions in that jail were unbelievably humiliating, at times horrific, always terrifying. You'll see more about that in a moment. And as Uncle Vic wrote in his memoir, we were all haunted at that time by the thought of Dachau, the notorious concentration camp. After 6 weeks, my dad was released from jail. I don't know why. He went back to his place of work, the insurance company, to try to earn a living. He found out he no longer had a job. On the table there, with some of the other historical artifacts, is the original of this document. I think his employers felt bad for him at the time. And what it says is, it's a testimonial. I believe they typed the original in English, because I have both. The English looks like it's an original also. It confirms, it certifies that it says Ralph Gans, that was their English version of Rudy, had been employed as an official since 1922. He distinguished himself by special sense of duty, greatest conscientiousness and diligence. He was only dismissed on account of the new reform of the business. The new reform, no Jews. So he went back to his place of residence only to find out he no longer had a place of residence. Nazis had taken over it. On the streets, with nothing, no possessions, no nothing, on the street, no job, no home, subject to rearrest at any time. Several months then passed, during which most Jews in Austria had their possessions and their money taken away, that is to say, stolen by the Nazis. They were kicked out of their homes, which were taken over by the Nazis, like happened to my dad. And they were subject to search at any time, arrest at any time, beatings and rape at any time on the streets, torture at any time, and imprisonment at any time. As Uncle Vic writes in his memoir, and as I heard elsewhere, suicides were not uncommon. That gives you a sense of how bad it was, even if you weren't sent yet to jail or a concentration camp. In October 1938, all Jews had to hand in their passport and get the big red J stamped on it for Jew. This is my dad's original passport. It's filled with I'm not even going to look at it. It's filled with with the Nazi stamps and insignia. I get chills when I hold this thing. My dad's original passport. And then came November 1938. On November 8, 1938, my dad was rearrested and his two brothers were now also arrested, placed into Linz jail cells number 30, 31, and 32. November 9, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. That night, Jewish homes, hospitals, and schools throughout Austria and Germany were ransacked and demolished in a frenzy orchestrated by the Nazis. 7,000 Jewish businesses were destroyed or seriously damaged. Beatings, killings, and rapes were widespread. 30,000 Jewish men were immediately arrested and sent to the local prison or directly to concentration camps. Remember that beautiful synagogue, that big, beautiful building in Linz? On the evening of November 9 and 10, it was ransacked, burned, completely destroyed, and as Uncle Vic wrote, with people inside, as were hundreds of additional Jewish synagogues throughout Austria and Germany. Recall this series of photographs? Uncle Gus emerging with his bride, that's my Aunt Melita, in late September 1938. That was the last wedding that ever happened in that synagogue. On November 10, Victor Taussig, my mother's father, was then arrested again. I'm going to show you, I have the original of the letter I'm going to describe on the table there. My grandfather, Victor, wrote a letter to his son in 1939. It's a detailed, lengthy letter, in part describing what happened at the jail, just one paragraph of what he wrote. There's the letter, and there's the original on the table. First, they took us to the police station and then to SS Hell. There, they tortured us for 3 days. Some were beaten to the point where they were unrecognizable. 53 of us were then thrown into a small cell meant for 16, and we were only allowed to sleep every other night. November 15, 1938. November 15, 1938. Winter had already arrived in Austria. Outside, it was raining, sleeting, snowing. 3 a.m. in the morning, the jail cells, the Linz jail cells, slam open. The Gans brothers and other prisoners were marched outside in their street clothes, no protection from the elements, and marched onto a flatbed truck, completely uncovered, no protection from the elements. As Uncle Vic writes in his memoir, there we were packed like standing sardines, and the truck took off and drove for hours and hours and hours. They feared, and after many hours of transport, their worst fears were coming true. They knew they were soon to enter Dachau. As Uncle Vic wrote, so much was already known about Dachau that the mere word or thought of it caused horror. This is a diagram that appears in Uncle Vic's memoir. It's a handwritten diagram, obviously, that he did. The entrance is on top. The 2 squares, those are processing facilities that the Nazis used. The field is in the middle, and there you see the barracks. I know exactly where my dad and his 2 brothers were in those barracks, and I'll show you why in a moment. After hours of transport under those conditions in the middle of the night, going from Linz to Dachau, remember I said it's like from San Diego to Santa Barbara? Well, in good weather, in good roads, in good conditions, from San Diego to Santa Barbara, it takes like 5 hours. Heaven knows how long they were standing like that in the elements. On top of that, when they got off, they were told to stand at attention in that open field for hours and hours and hours. Anyone who moved at all was punched, beaten, kicked, or worse. As Uncle Vic writes in his memoir, I would have given anything just to have been able to move my fingers a little bit. After hours of that, they were then marched into the adjoining facilities, and there it all began. Their heads were shaved, their clothes were taken, they were given summer uniforms, any possessions that they had were taken, and there some of the really bad stuff, the humiliation and worse, started right then and there. Then during the next several, I want to show you this. This is an overhead. The United States Air Force took a photograph of Dachau. You can see it lines up with the diagram. You can see the entryway. You can see the field where they had to stand and the barracks. To the left of the center there, those are arguably where the lucky ones went, the slave labor manufacturing facilities. They could go there from early morning to late at night under terrible conditions. That's what that is. And, hard to believe, Dachau was the equivalent of 15 football fields. That's how big Dachau was. You can imagine, particularly when they packed so many people in there, what was going on in there. In that regard, as Uncle Vic writes, during the next several days and weeks, this is what he observed. Beatings with thick wooden sticks of the young, the old, the sick, for any reason or for no reason at all. The kickings were with heavy, black, pointed boots. Also hard, extensive whippings for any reason or for no reason at all, and the standard offense was 25 lashes. One Nazi would do the counting, another would do the whipping as hard as he could. The person doing the counting, more often than not, would get up into the teens and say, oh my gosh, I lost my place, we better start over again. And they did. Torture by awful devices, which Vic describes, which I will not. Hangings and shootings. And yet, the Nazis were able to portray in various methods. I'll show you one. There are others. If I had time, I would tell you others. They were able to pretend to the outside world that it wasn't so bad. One of the ways they did was to have the prisoners write home to their family. This here, I'm not even going to hold it myself. This is my dad's original postcard, and there you see it up there. In the upper left, you see the word Dachau. Going vertically, you see Rudolf Gans. That's his handwriting, I know. He was in Block 26, Section 7. He's writing the postcard, had to write the postcard, home to his sister, one of his two sisters, Liesel. She had married, her name was Liesel Bruckner, and you can see it was sent to Linz. What does the postcard say? It says, "Hello, Liesel, how are you? How's the family? Don't worry about me or your other brothers, Vic and Gus. We're fine. Don't worry about us, but please send money." So the family scrounged together some money. They sent it to Dachau. Of course, the Gans brothers never saw a penny of it, but that's one of the ways that the Nazis tried to have the outside world not realize what was actually happening. During the subsequent weeks, long hours of horror became longer days, and then weeks, and then, after 5 weeks, on December 21, 1938, the Gans brothers were released from Dachau. What led to this? How could this possibly be? At the time the Gans brothers were in Dachau, that place, although it had constant daily atrocities and many daily deaths from beatings and torture and other abuses, it was not yet a dedicated extermination camp. Not yet were the gas chambers operating. Not yet were the ovens operating. Pardon me. At that time, if you had an establishable, provable way to show to the German authorities that you could get out of Germany and get to a different country within 24 hours, you could get out. You wouldn't get out with anything but the clothes on your back, but you'd get out. But when you're a prisoner in Dachau, how can you get that stuff? How can you show you have a place to go? Countries were closing their borders. How do you show you have tickets? How do you show you have train tickets, airplane tickets, whatever? How do you show you have permission from another country, and how do you actually get there? How do you get through the extraordinary German bureaucracy that they put up? The signatures, the affidavits, the stamps, the fees, all this stuff that you had to go through to get the documentation. How do you do that? When you're a prisoner in Dachau, and you had to get out within 24 hours. Here's a brief, very oversimplified summary of how the Gans brothers did that, or, more better stated, how family members and friends and total strangers set free my dad and his two brothers. First, getting out of Dachau. You see the name up there, Max Hirschfeld. I'm not sure if it's Hirschfeld or Hirschfeld. This is another extraordinary, to me, mini story. Max Hirschfeld, within this bigger story, Max Hirschfeld was appointed by the Nazis as Commissioner for Jewish Affairs in Linz. At great personal risk to himself, he took it upon himself to deceive a Nazi official to sign a document saying that there were 3 ship tickets for the Gans brothers to go to Shanghai, China, when in fact there were none. As Uncle Vic writes in his memoir, "And we went free only through the endless effort of Mr. Hirschfeld. May his name be inscribed in the golden book of the heaven. He managed that his boss, the Nazi official, signed papers for the Gestapo that he had made reservation for us 3 brothers to go to Shanghai, and that we would depart for this destination immediately." You see in the middle an affidavit. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. Getting out of Austria. Remember I said that Vali, Uncle Vic's wife, was something of a heroine in this story? Here's why. At great personal risk to herself, she made multiple trips from Linz to Vienna, Vienna back to Linz, back and forth, getting the necessary documentation, getting the necessary fee, paying the necessary fees, getting the necessary signatures, waiting hours and hours for people, pleading, begging, finally getting just about everything except one thing, the ship tickets. She couldn't get ship tickets. On the very last day, in desperation, she went to the United States consulate in Vienna. There, some angels in the United States consulate told them that there was a family of 5 who had planned to go on a ship leaving from Genoa, Italy, to go to Shanghai, and the family of 5 decided not to go then because one of their family members had taken ill, and they didn't want to leave without this family member. They were going to take a different ship. Vali was able to secure 3 ship tickets for the brothers. The brothers, remember, they left Dachau on the morning of December 21, 1938. The train was leaving Linz. They had to get out within 24 hours. The train was leaving Linz at 10 p.m. on December 21, 1938. 10 p.m. on December 21, 1938. They made it from Dachau to Linz, ultimately to the train station. They got there at 9 p.m. at night. The train was leaving at 10. But Vali had not yet returned from her last trip. They didn't have the papers. They didn't have what they needed to board that ship. 9:15, she wasn't there. 9:20, she wasn't there. 9:30, she wasn't there. If she didn't arrive on time, or excuse me, if she didn't arrive by 10 p.m., end of story. They would have been rearrested, immediately sent back to Dachau, and that would have been the end of that. At 20 to 10, they see some commotion at the other end of the platform. There's Vali, running, waving the papers. She had the papers, just in time. They boarded the train just before 10 p.m., and that's how they were able to ultimately get out of Austria. They then went on that train down to Genoa, Italy. Why? To Shanghai, China. Why from Genoa to Shanghai? Because at that point in time, Shanghai was what's called an open city. Most other countries had closed their borders for historical reasons beyond the scope of this lecture presentation. It was an open city. You didn't need pre-authorization to get in. They got on the ship. This is a postcard of the ship. The actual postcard is on that table there, as well as the actual tickets. I have the original tickets. You can see them on the table. They were on the MS Victoria of the line Lloyd Triestino. You can see the ticket says it was leaving to go to Shanghai from Genoa, Italy on December 22, 1938. You can see two names on it, Gustav Gans, Gus, and Rudolf Gans, my dad, and Uncle Vic. I don't know why he had a separate ticket. There's the ticket, and there you see a picture of that ship that night and the Gans brothers on that ship. My dad arrived, and his passport is stamped in China. My dad arrived on January 13, 1939. Now, while Shanghai was paradise as compared to where they had come from, in reality, it was a very, very tough place. It was overcrowded, filled with crime, filled with dirt, filled with desperate property, was flooded from time to time. And they got off this ship with nothing but the clothes on their back. How do they survive in Shanghai? How can they possibly survive in Shanghai? Well, they were able to get a one-room, not a one-bedroom, mind you, a one-room apartment, which they had one piece of furniture, a bed, which they took turns sleeping in. No cooking facilities, no nothing, one room. There they survived, but also I want to show you, here's pictures, got lots of pictures, amazingly, of Shanghai in those days. These are some of the better pictures in terms of how it looks. I have the original of that map. It's on that table. That's a map that was issued, oddly enough, by the Navy YMCA. It's stamped 1938. Navy YMCA had facilities in Shanghai. My dad used that map to find his way around Shanghai. I used that map to find where they lived in their one-room apartment. How did they survive? They survived through the kindness of people, including the ones who got them a one-room apartment, and a lady by the name of Mrs. DeVault. I had never heard of Mrs. DeVault in my life until I saw this letter. Mrs. DeVault gave them one square meal a day. This is my dad's letter, which I found in his papers, written July 1 of 1939. I'm not going to read it all. I'll read a little bit of it. Dear Mrs. DeVault, we want to express our heartfelt gratitude for all your kindness and amiability you have granted to us. We can't give expression enough how often, or how we can estimate what you have done for us, what we have caused you in trouble, expenses, and inconvenience. We thank you once more for your generosity from the bottom of our heart. We will never forget it, and our desire will be all our life to repay you for this in every respect. They managed to survive, but of course they always wanted to get out of there and they wanted to go to America. How do you get to America? Here's this affidavit of support. Remember I mentioned briefly that affidavit, that I would come back to it? Here's the affidavit support. I never knew this existed until a few years ago when my cousin, the son of Uncle Gus, showed it to me. He has the original of that affidavit of support. It is signed by somebody by the name of Albert H. Van Dam. Albert H. Van Dam swears to the United States of America that he is the cousin of Rudolf Gans and Gus Gans. Again, I don't know what about Vic, but he swears that he's their cousin, and he promises the United States government that he will support them for up to 3 years in the United States, and he had to turn over his financial papers to prove that he could. They were not cousins. He was a distant relative, we believe. I have an old family tree. I think he was a distant relative. I think one of my dad's aunts, who had come to America decades, long before, years before, asked Albert H. Van Dam, who the heck is Albert Van Dam? He was a manufacturer of clothes in Manhattan, a reasonably successful manufacturer of clothes in Manhattan. He agreed to sign this. Without this, they not only wouldn't they have gotten into America, but per my dad's letter to him, they wouldn't have gotten out of Germany. Here is my dad's letter to him. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. By the formality of it, you can tell that they did not know each other. They had never communicated with each other. He says to Mr. Van Dam, he writes this on August 18, I think, 1939. Dear Mr. Van Dam, with regard to your affidavit, we will never forget that you gave us the possibility to get away from Germany, and what this means, only one can imagine who, like us, was living in the concentration camp and had the opportunity to become acquainted with the despotism of the Third Reich. In conclusion, once more, we thank you for your kindness and benevolence and remain yours ever gratefully, Rudolf Gans. My dad got out of Shanghai. There are various tickets and other documentation. I have the original of it. He got on the MS Kamakura Maru, which shows that he left Shanghai, went to San Francisco, and his passport is stamped San Francisco, October 6, 1939. Briefly, back to my mom's story, you'll recall that she got on a train to go to England. She was sent to Cambridge, England, and there she had to be a maid. They were decent enough, but they were very strict, and they worked her very hard, and they were very class conscious. She had to live in the basement. She got chastised once for even going out the front door, worked very, very hard. And one time they took a trip, they took her along for provide maid services. When they came back, I don't know if you can read it, she says in her audio biography, it was then that she realized, I will never be able to go back to my home again. And those were long, worrisome months. Why? Her mom was with the Nazis. Her dad was with the Nazis. Through the extraordinary kindness of people in England and friends and total strangers, she got my mom out. And then she got her mom out. And then she got her dad out. And they too came to Cambridge. And as my mom said, they got out just in time. Why? Because shortly after my grandfather got out, Hitler invaded Poland, World War II broke out, all the borders were closed. Anyone who was left, they were arrested, the Jews, jailed, sent to concentration camp, where most were then killed, including my mother's uncle on her mother's side, her brother, her aunt and uncle on her mother's side were killed. Likewise, her aunt and uncle on her father's side. Their children, my mother's cousins, were murdered by the Nazis in the camps. And as you know, 6 million Jews were killed, including 1.5 million children. Why do I have this kind of crazy photograph on the bottom? That photograph is a photograph of Petco Park. Let's assume generously Petco Park sits 50,000. Envision 100% filled with young, happy, laughing children, 50,000. Then envision 30 Petco Parks, one after another, after another, after another. That's 1.5 million children murdered by the Nazis. And 4 to 5 million more. A total of 11 million murdered by the Nazis. The 4 to 5 million more, they might have been government officials, the disabled, gypsies, homosexuals, anybody who didn't meet the criteria of the Nazis murdered. I try to also say, you know, how do you possibly begin to envision this from a personal standpoint? Think of your last major big Thanksgiving celebration. Maybe you had all your relatives and friends, maybe 15, 20, 30 people around a table. Then think of your next Thanksgiving and no one's there. They're all gone. It was an industry of murder. I would like to show you more, but I want to be sensitive to the time. It was an industry of murder. Dachau was one of dozens of that size, and there were bigger ones. And I read recently that there were hundreds of other concentration camps scattered throughout Austria, Germany, and Poland, smaller ones, bigger ones. They had to have so many to kill 11 million people. For 1.5 years, my mom was exclusively a maid in Cambridge. Then she was able to use her seamstress skills, and she was able to open a little shop in Cambridge, or a little business in Cambridge fixing clothes. Remember, it was the war now, and that was really important because all the clothes manufacturing stuff was going to the war effort. They were able to eke out a little money, which they needed because of had her parents over. Now, and they couldn't get a job, but my grandfather, if you recall, was a master brewer, and he was able to secure a job in London. So they told their friends they're going to go to London. And their friends said, London, England, you can't go to London, England. You're crazy. Why did they say that? Because this is what was happening in London, England. For 9 months, from September 1940 through May 1941, London was bombed systematically by the Luftwaffe. Beginning in September 7, 56 out of the following 57 nights, the Luftwaffe bombed London. My mother has incredible stories about living through that. If we have time later, I'd love to share with you some of those stories, but I'm going to move on. My mom wanted to come to America. She thought she'd be there for maybe another 3 more months. It took her 3 more years to get the money, the tickets, the permissions to get to America. Here you see a cablegram. That's how they communicated, with telegrams. I have the original on the table there, by which my mom and my dad tried to communicate. Here you see the one where my mom tells my father she's coming, and she's going to land at LaGuardia Airport. She arrives at LaGuardia Airport on August 6, 1945, and at long last, after 7 long, hard years, she's reunited with Rudy. 6 days later, they get married in Manhattan. August 14, 1945. August 14, 1945, Japan surrendered. VJ Day. VJ Day. My mom and dad went to Times Square, and it was a spontaneous celebration in Times Square. You see 2 pictures there. The bottom one is Times Square. The top one is Trafalgar. And Trafalgar Square, my mom was in England at the time. She happened to be at Trafalgar Square on VE Day, which preceded VJ Day. I don't know, but she may be one of the few, perhaps the only person in the world who happened to be in Trafalgar Square, where she said she heard and listened to Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and in her words, it was unbelievable that there would be no more bombings. And then she's in America in Times Square for VJ Day, spontaneous celebration. Euphoria, they're in America. But then reality sets in. My dad couldn't get a job. My mom couldn't get a job. Amazingly, they brought my mom's parents over. Amazingly, they brought my dad's parents over, and they were both ill. They had no money. How do you get it? My dad didn't speak much of the language at the time. How do you get a job? I'm going to show you a letter. We're almost done. I'm going to show you a letter that was written when I was 5.5 years old. It was written to a man by the name of Mr. Bulliver. Bulliver Watch Company at that time was one of the premier, perhaps the premier watch company in the world. And this is my dad's letter to Mr. Bulliver. I'm going to read a few sentences, I hope. I sometimes, I'm ready, can't get through it. This was written, as I said, when I was 5.5 years old. Then you can figure out how old I am. It was written in 1954. Dear Mr. Bulliver, this letter is an expression of deepest gratitude to you, and I hope you will not consider it too presumptuous if I take your valuable time. Yet it was you, sir, who helped me at a time of greatest need and gave me a job when it was almost impossible to find work. To you, it was a fleeting incident, but to me, it was a new chapter in my life when you granted me an interview in your Rockefeller Center office exactly 15 years ago today. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You gave me a chance at a time when I needed it most. God bless you, sir, Anytime a question arises about our beloved America, what it stands for, and how her people are inspired by our democratic way of thinking, I think of you, Mr. Bulova. It was real Americanism in practice, not theory, when you, in your high and demanding position, took time to listen to me and give me help. The best way for me to thank you is to continue with the best of my ability for Bulova Watch and to do my bit to make our organization grow and prosper and to prove to you that your effort on my behalf was not in vain. As a father, I try to bring up my children to be good American citizens, holding you, Mr. Bulova, as a shining example of a real American. With my heartfelt thanks, and also in the name of my family, respectfully yours, Rudolph Gans. Legend has it, and my mom swears it true, that after 32 years, my dad worked for Bulova for 32 years, he missed one day of work, and that's because he left notwithstanding the forecast of a blizzard, and he couldn't make it there. I have some final concluding words. I hope you don't find them too presumptuous. This is coming from me to you. I really mean it. And here we go. As you go through life, do the right thing. Your inner voice, your heart, and your conscience tells you what's right and what's wrong. Follow your inner voice. Be active. Be engaged. Stand up to bullies. Help those less fortunate than you. Reach out. Volunteer. It only takes one person to make a positive change. Recognize and appreciate all the blessings that we all have every day, that you have every day. Peace, a roof over your head, freedom from tyranny, supermarkets jammed with food from all over the world, and perhaps most important of all, the opportunity to help your fellow man and fellow woman. You each have the opportunity to conceivably change for the better your class, your school, your neighborhood, San Diego, America, the world. Just maybe go down to the neighbor. Maybe the neighbor needs a little help. Maybe need a little assistance. Maybe a classmate needs some words of encouragement. Go on from there. You will feel good. You will feel good when you do good, I promise you. And recognize and appreciate all the blessings we all have every day. And in my dad's words, do your bit to help make the world a better place. Thank you. I appreciate your attention. I hope you did find it interesting and informative. Thank you all.